Good evening. Dear former Minister of Defense of Austria and President of the Austrian Institute for European Security Studies, Mr. Werner Fasslabend, and distinguished speakers, Excellencies, dear ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to welcome you tonight, together with all the participants who follow us via our online streaming, to tonight's event, Trump 2.0, NATO and Europa's Security, organized by the Austrian Institute for European Security Studies in cooperation with the Diplomatische Akademie, Wien. The timing of the event couldn't have been chosen better. But exactly now, the United States have Donald Trump for a second time as their president. The US presidential elections have always been important in politics and have always attracted a lot of attention in the US and around the world. But I'm not aware that the candidate and former president has previously been so contested and polarizing so much. A recent article in a European newspaper mentioned that while many countries around the world now seem to see Mr. Trump's second term as president in a positive light, only Europe and South Korea are still skeptic about him. I'm therefore particularly happy to welcome today our high-level speakers from NATO, from the Munich Security Conference, and from the armed forces, who will analyze the impact of Trump's presidency on NATO and on Europe's security. Austria joined, as you know, the Partnership for Peace of NATO, called NATO PFP, in 1995, exactly 30 years ago. My previous function before joining the Diplomatische Akademie Wien actually was Deputy Head of Mission of Austria to NATO. During my time at NATO, I contributed to the individually tailored partnership program, also called ITPP, between Austria and NATO, which was the first of the ITPPs signed by NATO. Today, Austria, together with Ireland, Malta, and Switzerland, form the Western European partners, WEP4, called in NATO, which consider themselves as NATO's closest partners in values, in particular through the shared interest in Euro-Atlantic security. Allow me, therefore, to take advantage of this opportunity to highlight the important work of the Western European partners, the WEP4. They participate significantly in NATO, as well as in the UN, in the EU, OSCE missions and operations. They are contributing to interoperability and capacity building. They contribute to NATO's largest ongoing mission, KFOR in Kosovo, with significant contingents. They contribute to human security, capacity building, and arms control and non-proliferation. And they also offer education and training through courses and exercises open to allies and other partners. In offering their expertise and know-how, they can contribute to shaping policies at an early stage, together with other like-minded and advanced partners, thus adding broader support and expertise to such policies. This contribution to dialogue and cooperation by the Western partners is an important element of stability and security in the Euro-Atlantic area. But how will the role of the alliance, including the role of the partners, develop now with President Trump as Commander-in-Chief of the US? I wish you all, also to the public following us online streaming, a very interesting evening. And now I pass the floor to the Director of the Austrian Institute for European Security Studies, Mr. Michael Zinkanell. Thank you.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, distinguished excellencies, dear colleagues, it's my great pleasure to welcome you here at the Vienna School of International Studies, the Diplomatic Academy of Vienna, in my capacity as the director of the Austrian Institute for European and Security Policy, to our first public event this year, which, as Deputy Director Schubert already mentioned, is on a historic day, the inauguration day of the 47th President of the United States, President Trump, just as we are speaking right now, also gives his inauguration speech. And I would like to make one quote that just got released in the live ticker that I was checking before this event, where President Trump mentioned this quote in his inauguration speech. "The golden age of America begins right now. From this day forward, our country will flourish and be respected again all over the world. We will be the envy of every nation and will not allow ourselves to be taken advantage any longer of any single day of the Trump administration. I will very simply put America first." These were the words that President Trump just made in his inauguration speech just a couple of minutes ago. And I think through these words and through the actions that he has already put forth, we can for sure say that this will be a very decisive time for the United States, but also for Europe, for the relationship between the US and the EU, especially with regards to NATO, with regards to the fact that NATO, as we have mentioned also in previous discussions that we hosted here, is still the core element of European security, and therefore it is of utmost importance for us here in Austria also to discuss the potential implications and impacts that this new Trump administration will have on global security, on transatlantic security, on European security, because also here in Austria, also here in Vienna, we will be affected by these implications. As a democratic country, as a country that is part of the European Union and therefore also part of the common European security and defense, as a country at the heart of Europe, we will to some extent also feel these implications. And therefore it is my great pleasure to welcome our three distinguished speakers of today. I wish you all a very fruitful and insightful discussion and would like to hand over to our President, Dr. Werner Fasslabend, who is going to moderate today's session. Thank you very much.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure for me to present to you not only our three speakers of today, but also to start with an event that certainly does have some specificities, as it was expressed already just a few minutes ago. Inauguration ceremonies in Washington started. At the same time, you know, we celebrate 30 years Austria's membership of NATO PFP, and it was only a few months ago, in July last year, when I had the opportunity to take part also at the NATO summit in Washington, when 75 years of NATO were celebrated. And we have to be aware that this certainly has brought or will bring quite a few changes. Only if I look into the first row of our seats, Ambassador of Finland, for example, Sweden will be here, showing very clearly that the time will be changing. And if we look forward now a little bit, and I think this was also more or less the motivation to start this way, we really have to be aware that it is not only a period of Zeitenwende, but an enormous challenge for all of us. Why? Probably in these moments, President Biden, he was called the last European, will leave his office. President Donald Trump will come, and this will not only change the politics in America and in Europe, especially also maybe the status of NATO, but maybe our consciousness and our view of the Western world. Why? Because up to now it was clear that, okay, the Western world stood for democracy, for a free trade region, and at the same time also for a rule-based international order. And if we are looking forward now, we got the warning of President Biden that, okay, we could be confronted with sort of an oligarchy in America. Whether this was a little bit too much, okay, you can discuss about it, but it certainly will be interesting. At the same time, the new president, the incoming president, announced already that he will raise the import duties for everybody, not only for China with 60%, but also for Europe with 10 or 20%. And also this rule-based order looks a little bit different to his statements concerning Greenland or Panama and even Canada. And insofar, we have to be aware and have to make ourselves aware of these really big changes. Yeah, therefore it's a great pleasure for me to have three outstanding speakers today. I will present them a little bit later on. Before we go into it, I just wanted to show a few pictures. We just presented the map of NATO. I cannot see it. This is NATO as we are looking at it from the European side. The dark blue one is all the members. Now also with the new members, Sweden and Finland. You can see in Europe there's only Austria and Switzerland in the center, then Bosnia as a candidate, and a few countries that have that are not candidates, but they do have an action plan for individual partnerships. This is more or less the ongoing map. But if we go further on and look how do the Americans look at this situation, of course, for them, NATO had a different function. I always try to explain that, of course, the Europeans look at NATO as an institution that was founded in order to protect the Europeans against the Soviets. But from the American point of view, this was different. America realized a typical counter-rim strategy, trying, to control the European coast at the other side in order to keep enemies away of it. This was the reason for the shaping of NATO between the North Cap down to Sicily. And because this was not possible at the Asian side, at the Pacific side, they founded this belt of partners with Japan, with South Korea, with Taiwan, and the Philippines, in order not to have a surprise similar to what they had to experience at the beginning of World War II. And this certainly is a different view. And if I just look to the same map with only circles, you can see that for the Americans, certainly, Ukraine does make sense, but it's not very important compared to what is happening at the Pacific side with 3 hotspots: Korea, Taiwan, and the South China Sea. And therefore, for sure, also these different priorities will be important for the future. And if we go further on, I also want to show that probably for the Europeans, we will have to accept that the situation has changed and will be changing. Our maritime lifeline in the past went from Europe, went from Rotterdam and Hamburg and Le Havre to New York and to the different harbors and ports in America. But we have a second lifeline that goes east through the Red Sea, through the Indo-Pacific Ocean, more or less to the Gulf states, to India, South Asia, Southeast Asia, and also East Asia. And this certainly is something that we also will have to look at in our movements with different organizations. Let us talk about NATO. And insofar, it is a great pleasure for me that we really have today such outstanding speakers. And the first one that I want to present, this is General Chris BADIA, a man that certainly has a very important function. You know, NATO does have 2 strategic commands, one for operation and the other one for transformation. And General BADIA is the Deputy Supreme Commander of the Command for Transformation in Norfolk. And this command is not only managing some different actions, but is preparing the future of NATO, which means the future of this alliance. Okay, he will explain us a little bit, and you can be sure that he is also familiar with the situation here in Austria and in Europe, because he was born 1963 in Bavaria, not very far from Austria. And he had a typical career. He became a fighter pilot. He was that for 8 years. And not only in any unit, but the unit he served was the fighter wing 71 Richthofen, where he also became the commander later on. But at the same time, he also became, in between, the head of the office of the parliamentary state secretaries. Then he became the division chief for strategic defense planning and concepts in the ministry in Germany, for defense in Germany. He became the commander of the European Air Transport Command in Eindhoven. And in 2018, he assumed the responsibility as Director General for Planning in the Ministry of Defense in Germany. And in 2022, he became the Deputy Supreme Allied Commander Transformation in Norfolk. It's a great pleasure to welcome you, and please, General, if you take the floor as our first speaker.
Thank you very much. Erst einmal grüß Gott miteinander, and now I do it in English, okay? So, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for the warm welcome. Great to be here. And if I listen to everything, if throughout the day, everything I had, and what the minister just said, being responsible for transformation, before you get too depressed, okay, from a transformational aspect, I'm always here to give you hope, okay? And hope also, living in the US, and that's what I really like about the US, is build on success and be positive, okay? And that's number one on NATO, and we should not forget, NATO is the most, if you will, successful alliance in modern history. NATO is now 32 members. Back in '89, when the wall came down, we were 16 members. Now we have 32 members. And they all joined because they wanted to be there. NATO, right now, with all the NATO member states, makes about 50% of the GDP and 50% of world trade. Okay, we have about 20 times more on GDP than Russia has, and we are spending 10% more on defense spending as Russia does. So it's a positive start, if you will. Okay, is it good enough? No. Okay, just to be honest to each other, because this is what the new Secretary General, Mr. Rutte, also said. We are still in a position where we can deter Russia, but we need to do it better. Okay, and this is really something my headquarter also has the responsibility for, because it's not only the warfare development we think of, but we do the complete defense planning for NATO. And I would like just take you along a little bit in understanding also with, well, 2.0 security of Europe, where are we, what are we doing, and what do we base it on, and what is my perspective also, and I come back to that. If the US does not provide, it's not playing the role, but maybe not providing any longer capabilities they have provided in the past. And I will take you along in the next 15 minutes or so, and just to give you a bit of glance where we are. And number one, ladies and gentlemen, the most important thing is, in order to understand, of course, you look also what's your opponent, what's the security and threat perspective out there. And that's, of course, one of the major changes we are having, and you really need to look into it. You cannot define security regional anymore. It's global. This is what we just heard. It's the global aspect you have to understand. And if you understand it global, then very soon and very fast you get to, well, first of all, you have China. China, it's a big expansion. What do we see down in Asia? Okay, in the Pacific region, 3 billion people living there. There you have where the economic growth really is, and where everything happens. And I get back to that when I look through the American lens, what it means for America and how they go about it. But it's not only China. It's North Korea, which is has a big destabilization factor within the area, if you see, when it comes to proliferation and all those things. Then you go to Iran, where we have a real problem as well, because also from a US perspective, when you look on stabilization for the Near and Middle East, what that means. And then, of course, you jump over to Europe, and then you have Russia. Russia with a big devastation factor, where we have war in the Ukraine with all those aspects. But, and that's where it's so important for us, if you see that a lot of people always talk about this Cold War 2.0. I tell you, if you see all this, this is a lot more, it's a lot more complex than it's just a Cold War 2.0. It's a new world order. This is what they are all about, and this is what's being changed. And especially if you look, for instance, if you look at the BRIC states, as they develop, and when we talk sanctions, our sanctions are really working, but this is what we, from a NATO perspective, as we are concerned as well at the same time, now it's not working anymore. Because NATO, and I get to that, NATO is 32 allies plus 35 partners, so you have about 67 like-minded nations when it comes to that. And if you look how United Nations is voting, what's going on, when you come back to sanctions, those are all the concerns we are having as you look to, and that is what I said, if you come back to when it comes to global understanding. And right now, yes, deterrence works still in a certain way. This is why you have all those hybrid attacks. When it comes to space, when it comes to spoofing, and when it comes to blinding from satellites, all those things, when it comes to freedom of navigation, when satellites do not provide the service anymore as you need, when it comes to critical undersea infrastructure in the Baltics, all those things, and this is really something, it's not the one or the other, it's all together, and then you are minimum in the conflict. I would call it already a war on hybrid, what we see and where we go. And this is what you need to understand again, and it has a global factor in total. This is where we come from. So for us, this is really where, from a NATO perspective, when we look at it, when we talk about which capabilities are needed for the future, because the most important thing is, this is what I always preach it, don't prepare for the war of yesterday. Because if you go here and today, if you don't understand what's needed, what the capabilities are you need in 10, 15 years, because you need to decide it now, you always look backwards and you always wonder why you're never prepared for what's happening right now. This is one of the major tasks we are having, and this is really something where we go and say, well, member nations, this is where we need to invest, and I get in a second to that. So really from that, this is what we see when it comes to challenges overall as we go forward. So how has NATO reacted, ladies and gentlemen? For us, the big change change came back in 2022 Madrid Summit. Madrid Summit changed the way NATO really is organizing itself and the directions we are taking. Because this is where the main task, we have 3 major tasks, but the main task of NATO is deterrence and defense. And this is also something where people still don't understand. It's deterrence, deterrence, deterrence. If you have to defend, a lot of things have gone wrong. Okay, so we need. This is where I come back when we talk capabilities, because what does deterrence mean? Deterrence means the right capability, at the right readiness, and the will to use it. And this is what you have to prepare for. If you don't do that, you don't deter. And if you don't deter, no wonder this is where you will see where you go in conflict. So this is what we're really discussing as we go forward, as we take it. So this is what the Madrid Summit really brought to us. You all know where we raised all the readiness, where we deployed troops further to the east, enhanced forward presence, new regional plans. So this is, since 2022, this is what we plan, this is what we follow, and this is how we go about it. The Vilnius Summit just approved the plans to it, and now it comes the Washington Summit last year, July. And there are 5 major lines. I just would like to take you along to understand where NATO is heading to and what NATO really holds right now. Number 1, it's not a surprise, but still it's quite something. 32 heads of states agreed to the same threat. That was not the case before. So what the threat? The threat is Russia. The threat is terror, and you see in the Declaration of Washington a very strong language on China. This is what has changed, and this is how we go about with 32, plus the partner nations we are having. Because, as I said, back in the Madrid Summit, from the 3 tasks, of course, cooperative security through partnership, which is, of course, for Austria, quite also a point to look at. This is where everything comes forward, and this is how we take it along. The second line, very, very important, the reaffirmed deterrence and defense, but now it comes 2% minimum spending for all the nations, plus the right capabilities. And the 2%, just let me quickly expand on that. The 2% is since 2014, that's a minimum, that's the baseline you need. And we are far beyond that, okay? Why? Because now we are 23 nations above the 2%. Back in 2014, 3 nations. So we are way past that point. So when we discuss nowadays the 3%, it's pretty easy to explain why. Because you need about 1.5 to 1.8% to fulfill what we have already agreed to, so from the past, and which not everybody has got to. So now we have a new challenge, we have new capabilities, and that's about 30% more of what we had before. This is where you need already an extra 1%. So you're really with 2.5, 2.8, and this is where we need to go towards 3. So really what it is, and as we see it, and we will not stop with the 3, but this is what you need right now, and this is what the Washington Summit brought at the same time. 360-degree approach. The Arctic is as important as the Atlantic. The East is as important as the West, and we need to be flexible and react on that. So this is the military point of those 3 lines. But line number 4 out of the Washington Summit and line number 5 is resilience. This is a complete new approach to it. Total defense, as Finland and Sweden show it, what it is. This is what you need if you want to defend, and it becomes more and more important if the US would pull out certain capabilities. So we need to strengthen resilience, whole of state, whole of government approach to it. This is what a complete understanding of the nations is, but this is what we need to have coordinated as 32 as we go forward. And last but not least, should be no surprise, you have to have an absolute strong defense industry basis in order to do that in Europe. This is also something new, because in the past it was military and NATO at the same time, always too distant, and it's not about getting too close or whatever. And all it means is have your defense industry fully understand where you develop to, what you need, and what they need to be prepared for in order to really provide to the nations what they need. So this is how we came out of that. You will see that now. This year we go to The Hague. And at The Hague Summit, then we come back to that 3%, defense industry, how to strengthen that, Ukraine, resilience. Those will be the major points as we go forward in order to do that. And why are we doing all those things? Because, ladies and gentlemen, at the end of the day, it's about dominance. It's always a bit when the military tells you it's all about winning. There is no prize for second best on the battlefield. We all have to understand that. And this is what you have to prepare for. And if you go, you hit hard and you win. And this is what we need all along. So this is where we prepare for, from a dominance aspect. And this is really what also, when it comes to, and I get to that, capabilities you need. There are always three things. You need to have information dominance in order to have decision dominance, and then you can escalate. And when we talk escalate nowadays, escalation dominance, the question is at the same time, yes, NATO is a defensive alliance. This does not mean that we do not possess, have, and will engage with offensive capabilities. This is where deterrence kicks in. This is what you need. You have to have a strong defense on one side and a strong offensive capability at the same time. Otherwise, you will not deter. And this is where a lot of new capabilities come in. And this is where the nations now have to even do more in order to be prepared and fulfill the task of deterrence and defense. With that, ladies and gentlemen, as we go forward, this is what defense planning right now is all about. We are right now in the defense planning process, have assigned the 2 nations with the 32 nations we are having. And you can always look at it as a cake, so you have 32 different pieces of the pie. As we assign it to the nations, and what you can expect and what you will see is, when we go to The Hague, there will be again 32 nations at the table agreeing to the same thing, because this is the same time, it needs to be that way, and it will be a strong signal, cohesion of the alliance, and this is as we go. So this is how NATO has overall reacted, as you see as you go forward. Now the question is, and this is the third part, the question really is, what happens if the US is not committing as we were used to? And I come back to, ladies and gentlemen, from an military analysis, and I always recommend to people, and it doesn't matter if it's the US, if it's China, or if it's Russia, if you want to have a holistic view to things, look through their lens and look through their glasses what it really means. And for me, it's not, I mean, of course we listen very close what the new President Trump says and what he comes, but for me at the same time, and this is what I also recommend, look on the second, third line of people you have now in the ministries. Because those are the ones who run the policies, those are the ones who will have a shift in where they want to go and what to expect. And if you read, and there are certain papers already out there, this is really a full understanding of where we are going. And for us, I can tell that from observing, since President Obama, who told us a long time ago, Europe needs to do more. And now from what I said before, if you see that from an economic point of view, Asia and Indo-Pacific is the main region number 1. From a US perspective, and as well from, if you see from an alliance, and we heard that from an Indo-Pacific alliance perspective, this is where US needs to turn to in order to balance. Because the US will be the only nation who can balance that and play a leadership role in order to do that. And at the same time, we have to understand, and I mean, we have to acknowledge the fact, okay, Europe can do a lot more when it comes to conventional capabilities. So for us, the reaction will be, well, we will be asked now in a not so nice way maybe anymore, okay? So we will be pressured in saying, well, you, Europe, you need to do more, and we have to acknowledge the fact, because we are capable of doing that in order to do that. What do I expect from, and when I say what do I expect with all the discussions we're having within our headquarters and within NATO, I do expect that, of course, when it comes to the nuclear aspect, the nuclear role of the US, I expect it will not change. It will be there. There will be the reassurance that the US will fulfill its role. It also, just think of it from a weapons of mass destruction point, from zero-sum game, proliferation aspects. It would be wise going this way. This is what we recommend at the same time. So I'm not expecting that we will see a reduction there. I'm not expecting that we see reductions in space capabilities, cyber capabilities, because they are easier to provide. But what we see is, when it comes to all those capabilities, land heavy or navy heavy, not so easy to deploy within hours or days, where it takes a lot longer, they will be most probably stationed and pivoted towards the Indo-Pacific earlier on, and we will see that. And this is where we can prepare, and this is where capability planning from a NATO side overall kicks back in to see What are the possibilities? Where do we need to do more? And where do we need to come in? And last but not least, ladies and gentlemen, let me just elaborate on one thing. We have 32 nations within NATO. But 4 nations are the big 4. It's US number 1, number 2 is Germany, number 3 is Great Britain, and number 4 is France. And those 4 nations together, they provide more than 60% of capabilities to NATO. And don't get me wrong, all 32 nations are equally important. Everybody has a share. But the bigger ones, and where do I want to go to? If the US would leave, it would be tragic. But as much if UK or France would leave, or Germany, it would be tragic at the same time, because NATO would not function anymore the way it functions. So really, now we need to come back, understand, we need to basically more or less leverage what there might be a gap when the US pulls out certain capabilities. I'm deeply convinced as we go forward from a European perspective in total, in order to leverage on that, we can do this. And now, the other thing is, and this is where those big European nations have to come to grips with, from an EU versus European perspective, you need to have a stronger leadership role amongst those nations on the European soil and continent in order to fulfill the role, and this is what you need. My take is, and this is what I always say, and Europe needs to talk with one voice. So I'm still, of course, I'm not worried. I have of course, a lot of thoughts and doubts what will happen, but I'm confident. If we do it early on, if we do it together, if we have a full understanding and nations have the commitment, we still can balance what the US might ask us to do. And if we do this, and then we will be on eye level a partner in order to go forward and play our role. Because otherwise, I would say this is, it would be, for Europe, it would bring us into an underdog role we should not take. We should not be there, and we should take care of Europe ourselves. With that, ladies and gentlemen, just to give you a bit of a perspective, this is what we do, this is what we can expect. But like I said, I'm very hopeful on the way forward. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, General, for your very lively presentation. It's a pleasure not to have just a formal presentation, but also to see that the whole personality is behind it. Now we want to immediately go to our next speaker, and this is Magister Nico LANGE. He was born in 1975 in Berlin, if this is correct. And he has more or less 2 careers, one as a soldier in Germany, and one as a political expert at the other hand. He worked many years for Konrad Adenauer Stiftung in different countries. He was in Ukraine, in St. Petersburg, in Washington, the leader of the offices. Then he became also the head for innovation and strategy in Saarland, and afterwards he became, between 2019 and 2022, Leiter des Leitungsstabes, leader of the leading staff of the German Bundeswehr. Now he is a senior fellow at the Munich Security Conference, and at the same time also he is teaching different military histories and strategies, etc., at the University of Potsdam and the Hertie School of Governance. Nico, it's a great pleasure to have you here. Please give us your presentation.
Thank you. I will follow the example of the General and speak from here. And on this day, inauguration of Donald Trump, I was reminded today that my first day of business when I moved to the US to work there, a couple of years ago was also the inauguration of Donald Trump. And I was reminded, and I thought about the time in 2016 and 2017 and what we thought about it and what our projections were. And I think by and large in Germany, and I would say also in Austria, there was the understanding, oh, this has been an accident of history. Yeah, and this will be over, and then we will be returning to normal, and our normal life, our Gemütlichkeit will continue after Trump is over. And now he is back, and I think the main message of this day is Gemütlichkeit will not return. It's extremely unlikely that anything that we know about how we organize our transatlantic relationship, how we work together in NATO, how we do trade, how we work in international organizations, how we deal with threats in Europe, that anything will be handled in the same way that it was handled 10 years ago or 15 years ago or 20 years ago. And I'm saying it that way because my impression is that everybody on the political stage acting believes that somehow a miracle will happen and we return to the good old normal times, and we do not need to do very much, but only to wait for this magic moment to happen. It will not come. I would like to discuss this very briefly using the title of today's event, Trump to Zero, NATO and Europe's Security. By the way, it's very interesting that we are doing this as two Germans and two Austrians speaking English. But let me start in the other way, in the other order than in the title. And let me start by Europe's security. I think what we cannot say clear enough, and I know it's sometimes very difficult to feel this in Vienna, because Vienna is a city where it's very nice and very comfortable to live in. But Europe's security is under threat. It is under threat like it has never been under threat for many, many decades. Because Russia started a war of aggression against Ukraine in 2014, it continued into a full-scale invasion in 2022, and the goal of Russia's war against Ukraine is not only to make independent Ukraine go away and to have a greater Russia. If you listen to what Putin is saying, if you read what he is writing, the goal is to fundamentally change the security order in Europe. And fundamentally change the security order in Europe from a Russian point of view means having a Russia that is greater than the Russia as it is today. It includes Ukraine and other places. Not having Americans on the European continent, not having historical anomalies from a Russian point of view, such as the European Union and NATO, and having a strong and big Russia pushing everybody else around on the European continent. That is what Putin wants. And now look at what we are doing. I already said a little bit ironically, we are hoping for this to be over somehow so that we can return to our Gemütlichkeit. And it is in the phrase that I hear very often from German, also from Austrian politicians, the war must be over. What does it mean? The war must be over. Putin will say, yes, I'm ready to talk about the war being over. Give me all of Ukraine, have the Americans out of Europe, and then the war will be over. Is that what we want? It's a serious question to Europe's security. For now, the Europeans are saying, let's wait, this will be over somehow, the war must be over. And then what? And I understand the US perspective on this. Joe Biden was very polite in saying it. Donald Trump will be less polite saying it. But he says, look, it's a European security problem. What are the Europeans doing to solve the problem of European security? Why are we expecting the Americans to solve the problem of European security? It's not only that we are expecting the Americans doing it, we are expecting the Americans doing it, and at the same time, we are talking bad about Americans. Yeah, this is a very specific German mix of the Americans must provide for our security, but let's also have a little bit of anti-Americanism. And let's tell the Americans that they are not really fully civilized as we are, the Europeans, because we are for peace and we are morally superior and all. And we have, I don't know, we don't eat hamburgers all of the time. So this approach will not work anymore for Europe's security. And let's be honest, let's be very honest with ourselves. Either we provide now for more European security ourselves, and while we are providing for our European security more, much more than we did before, we will ensure that we get American backup for this, because without American backup, we do not have the military capabilities to provide security in Europe. Or we don't do it, and then no miracle will happen. It's very obvious what will happen. There will be less security, less welfare, and it will be very ungemütlich in Europe. And by the way, there is no difference if you are a member of NATO or if you aren't. The European security problem is also a security problem for Austria. It's not only a security problem for the NATO members in Europe. The second point, NATO. I was asked many times because I was in the US when Trump became president for the first time, and as General BADIA, we spent some time together working also with a Trump government, having good experiences, I would say, also difficult experience, but it was possible to work with the Trump government. But when I'm asked today, is it possible that Trump will pull out the United States out of NATO? My honest answer is, it's not impossible. That's correct. Look at what he says. Look at what John Bolton, his former national security advisor, says. It's not impossible. But if we want to have security in Europe, and we need American backup for this, we better influence the situation in a direction that Trump will be inclined to stay in NATO and to provide for security together with us. This is not coming for itself. This is not solved by just waiting it out and sitting on our hands. And look at the reactions of many policymakers at the inauguration of Donald Trump today. It's again this mix out, we think that Trump will somehow pull the rabbit out of the hat and solve the war in Ukraine and come up with a ceasefire and peace. And at the same time, a little bit, the Americans, they are a little bit crazy. They have all those Elon Musks and the others there on stage, and he is inviting all the far-right politicians. So it's a mix of a little bit condescending and at the same time expecting a lot from the Donald Trump government. For NATO, I think we have, as Europeans in NATO, we have to put in a huge effort for keeping America and the American commitments on the European continent alive. I think that's the task for this term and for this Trump presidency. I believe for Germany it means spending 3% of our gross domestic product for defense. I personally believe we should spend 0.5% of it directly in Ukraine and for Ukraine. If everybody would do that, I think we would be able, as Europeans, not only to push Putin back to peace, but also to provide the deterrent to keep Ukraine safe also in the future. But look at the discussion in Germany. We have an election campaign going on, and the discussion is pretty much everything in the budget is of the same importance. There's no possibility to cut spending somewhere. I don't know how it is in your household, but at home, in my family, not everything is of the same importance. If we have to cut, then we have to set priorities, and some things are more important than others. So the real Zeitenwende question for Germany, is security more important than other things, is a question that needs to be answered by the next government. We will see. And my last point on Trump 2.0. I didn't want to be impolite earlier, but because it was happening while we are sitting here, I was reading on my mobile phone what Trump did. By the way, it was not a surprise. Everybody knew what was coming. It's also not a great miracle, but I'm just saying it because it was now published by the Trump White House. There is a state of emergency because of the situation to the border. The armed forces will be used at the border to Mexico. There will be what Trump would call the liberation of energy, which is a widespread liberalization of energy market regulations. By the way, in his first presidency, when Trump came into office, America was an importer of energy. When Trump left office, America became an exporter of LNG. By the way, this could have the effect that the energy prices go down and there will be less money in the coffers of the Russians financing their war machine. So the border, liberation of the energy market, tariffs, American first trade, basically tariffs for everybody, what we heard earlier, it's all happening, it's all signed. There is a huge first day wave of executive orders until dawn breaks in Washington, D.C., the world will be a different one. So it's happening. The question is not what is Trump doing. That is very evident what he's doing. The question is to us, what are we doing? And that's my last point. I think the change of transformation, the speed of transformation that we undergo as the European partners in NATO, and especially as Germany, is far too slow if you compare it to the challenges. And if we are not speeding up our transformation, then there will be less security and less welfare. I think that is the risk we are seeing. For the first time, we always took security as a given and thought welfare will only be more and more and more. I think for the first time we are now in a situation where security might not be a given anymore and where welfare might be lower. So it's up to us now how to pursue our interests also vis-à-vis a Trump administration. And let me close by saying, in this field, Trump, NATO, and Europe's security. I remind you what I said first. The problem for Europe's security is Vladimir Putin's war of aggression against Ukraine and against the European security order. And I'm saying it like this because there will be a lot of misunderstanding, there will be a lot of anti-Trumpism, which might extend to anti-Americanism, creating the impression that Donald Trump is the problem for Europe's security. He isn't. We can make him part of the solution if we want to fight against Putin's aggression in Ukraine, which is our security problem and not so much the security problem of the United States of America. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for your very clear words and also for providing us some optimism for the future, for the coming period, because everybody knows that, okay, the Europeans are not completely convinced about what will happen in the next 4 years. But the Austrians certainly are convinced that we are on the right track, and somebody who is responsible for this right track is Generalleutnant Bruno HOFBAUER, who will be our next speaker. He has a typical career, served at the Garde Battalion in Vienna, was Chief of Staff in the military command in Vienna, served 3 years in Brussels as a representative of Austria, but also in Bosnia at EUFOR. Then he became the commander of the Dritte Panzergrenadier Brigade, which certainly is one of the most important units in Austria. And in 2020, he became Capability Director, Planungschef of the Austrian Bundesheer. And since 2023, he is also the Deputy Chief of Staff. Please, Bruno, General HOFBAUER, take the floor.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, a lot has been said already. Now it's really tough to bring that back to the Austrian perspective a little bit, which is a task for the next few minutes for me. And I would like to share my thoughts about this latest security environments in latest security developments in Europe. We have lived through a shockwave after the Russian aggression, and the shockwave is ebbing down a little bit at the moment. Ukraine, the war is going on. Soon it will be the third year that the Russian aggression has happened. And the effects of this war were felt significantly in all of the military areas. The states of the Western Alliance and the goals of building enhanced military capabilities were talked about a little bit and a little bit more from time to time. Is that me? I'm sorry. Okay.
That's fine.
Okay. But and you heard from General BADIA that NATO is doing its best to beef up the capabilities, but this is also something that works. That also needs to work for Austria, because Russia is in the process of reinforcing its military posture versus Europe. You have heard, and I agree, what the aim of the Russian administration is at the moment, and this is not just Ukraine, it is more. And we also need to see that the whole system that was built after the Second World War is now not only under pressure, it's completely in a state of moving between those who are still thinking that everything is fine and there is the Northern Hemisphere, but on the other side you have all those nations that now see a chance to say a little bit that they are not happy with how the world is being was run during the last 50 or 30 years. So what my main message is that we were sleeping. We were sleeping over the last years. We could have seen it. 2008, it all started in Georgia. It went on to the Tiergarten in Berlin. It went on to the United Kingdom. Then Crimea came, and NATO went for the 2% goal. But was they taken serious? I don't think so. And then Putin explained what he would do, and we saw it. The Western agencies even shared their satellite pictures of what happened in the border regions before the Russian attack, and still it was not believed. And so we are now in a situation which is really uncomfortable. We have the war in Ukraine. We have NATO on the other side with 2 new member states like Finland and Sweden, which changes the security situation in the north and in the eastern part substantially. And now we have a new US administration whom we are not completely sure what they will do in the next months, days and years. And we need to be very clear, we are under attack. Also here in Austria. We are under attack on the information side, we are under attack in the cyberspace constantly, on a daily basis, not only cybercrime, this is something completely different, but cyber attack from forces from abroad. And the next might be the air. And we need to be aware that all the things that happen here in Europe, for Austria, it's not the same as for Switzerland, because we are outside NATO, but inside the European Union. And there is the Article 42.7 that has some really important tasks also for us. This works if the weather is fine, but the grayer the clouds are on the horizon, and these clouds are already here. We can see the thunderstorm on the horizon coming closer and closer. That is really becoming a problem also for us. So what? Austria being at the center of Europe, the geography is unchangeable. We are sitting on roads, on a very sophisticated transport network. If you want to go from Bavaria to Italy, from Italy to the Baltic states, from Germany to the Balkans, this is somehow affecting Austria. And this is not a NATO problem. This is a European problem. A problem that also has to be tackled and to be considered within Austria. So I would like really to highlight the fact that after 30 years in the Partnership for Peace, we have worked very closely with NATO. This is a real success story, but this came under different circumstances. If you look back to the 1990s, why was that all being done? There were the operations in the Balkans area, I4, S4, then the K4 operation, later came ISAF. It was a real condition for our armed forces to be able to be interoperable, to work together, to have the same understanding. If you do some tasking, if you read maps, you can't translate them in the case of emergency, as we had it, for instance, in the Balkans area, when a Ukrainian helicopter was not able to reach in time a heavily wounded soldier because they couldn't read the NATO maps. So this is something that is of highest importance also for the future. This is not something that stops. And from the military perspective, as the General mentioned already, not to be able to plan for the last war, but for the next war. This is really a message from my side. Ukraine is not the role model for the future war. It is showing some aspects of things that might come. Now we have the hype with the drones. This has been overseen. I really have to say that. But there will be new technological progress that will shape how the wars of the future will be fought. Artificial intelligence will make things faster, considerably faster, and especially the use or the mixture of autonomous weapon system with artificial intelligence is something that really needs to concern us for the future, because not everybody is sharing the same thoughts about having a man in the loop if it comes to use of lethal force. And this is something that we in the West, we have a certain idea how that should be managed, but not everybody is sharing our values. So, coming just to close that all, the military cooperation between Austria and NATO is substantial. We are waiting now for the white paper on defense in the European Union, but we must understand that this will not call for a duplication. Deterrence and defense is the duty that will be taken on in NATO. And the European Union will come up with other instruments of power in support. For instance, especially when it comes to the defense technological industrial base. But we should clearly see that there will not be a European army anytime soon. There is, and this is something very important from the Austrian perspective, with Sweden and Finland having joined NATO, the weight of those last countries that are still outside NATO and inside EU is diminishing. Austria, Ireland, Malta and Cyprus, they have no weight if it comes to ask for special things. And there is no defense planning anytime soon in the EU if it comes to the defense of Europe, because all the EU member states that have a weight are inside NATO, and this is where the business is done. Thank you very much.
Yeah, General, thank you very much for giving us this Austrian perspective, which certainly is more than important. And I just considered at the beginning whether I should show you a map. You know how far Russia is away from Vienna? If you look to the Oblast Kaliningrad, between Vienna and Kaliningrad, the former Königsberg, it's exactly 777 kilometers. This is about the same distance as between Vienna and Geneva, or Vienna and Rome, or Vienna and Cologne, Köln, Dortmund, for all those people who are interested in football. It's closer than the distance between Vienna and Hamburg, and of course also between Vienna and Brussels or Amsterdam. And insofar, to believe that we are outside of the business is completely wrong. 777 kilometers. You also could say Hermannstadt in Siebenbürgen in Transylvania, round about the same distance. So far, it really is necessary to occupy ourselves much, much more. And as the General also pointed out, you know, there also is vice versa at the other side, of course, quite some importance. Because you cannot organize a European protection and security without also using the ways between Germany and Italy, or between Northern Europe and Southeastern Europe and Southern Europe, and. Okay, so far, thank you very much also for your contribution, and now we would like to ask a few questions and discuss a little bit. And the first question I would like to ask, of course, General Yu, a German general, General Freudig, who is the head of the Analyze Center for Ukraine in the German Defense Ministry. He pointed out just a few days ago that the armament production in Russia is immense. And if it goes on the way it is produced at the moment, in 2028, this could already become quite a danger also for other European countries. He said they are producing 1.5 million drones a year, for example, and many, many other things. And then so far my question is, are we prepared? And are we prepared if US is engaged much more with South China Sea or Taiwan or Korea or whatever?
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, I'm really very sensitive about naming years when reconstitution of Russia might happen or attacks might take place. Let me say that very, very clear. I think this is suicidal if you do this. Again, look through a Russian or aggressor's lens, and your opponent discusses openly, is it 28, is it 29, or when should it be? If you want to try something, well, you would do it earlier. Would be Russia, in this case, would they be capable at least trying it? Never underestimate, because they would be. So, and part number one. So I'm really far away of naming years when things should happen, and I think personally it's dangerous doing that. Number two, now when if you really want, and you just said that, talk to NATO member states or other states bordering Belarus or bordering Russia. They will tell you, you better be prepared tomorrow. This is what you need, and this is where we need to go, and this is, you know, we have, and this is, again, everything we've heard, we still are not having the mindset. A lot of citizens and nations, you could have the feeling they're still on vacation. And this is totally wrong if you want to prepare. I come back to, if you want to deter, You have to do it in a total different way. So are we prepared? Yes and no, because now, and I would like to reference, some of you might have read the Draghi report, the newest one, okay? The European buying power on defense is there, so we would be prepared. But if you buy 63% outside EU and 70% of your buying power goes outside EU nations, outside, so you have 80% of your buying power is going somewhere. And just in comparison, 95% of the US buying power on defense goes into the US. And there you go. And just to make it even worse, while from that money, 14% go in research and development money, within the EU it's 4%. So we are not only investing, we are also cutting off everything we have in order to develop. So coming back to that, and this is really something where EU needs to be strengthened overall. This is where we are in close contact with EU and the Commission and everybody. But it has to be set because the conditions are there. And I fully agree with Nico Lange when he said, Russia is not going away. 6 to 8% of GDP is going into Russian defense right now. And like it or not, okay, they will be there in 10 years and in 15 years and in 20 years. So we need to come to grips with it in order to go. So coming back to your question right now, we can do a lot more. Can we do it? This is the real aspect we have to think about. Yes, we can.
Yeah, maybe a question also to you, Nico. You talked about the situation in Europe, and we were talking from the beginning also what will happen when Trump will have his second term. But if we look to the European situation, who is capable in Europe in order to overtake leadership, what you said? If you look to the situation in France, in Germany, in Italy, in Great Britain, in Poland, and so on, maybe you can give us a little picture what you are thinking about it. How strong is Europe politically in order to withstand an aggression from outside?
Let me say first, when it comes to Russia and the threat, I believe the biggest threat is not determined by counting the tanks and the vehicles and the drones or whatever. I think the biggest threat is coming from the political will that is there in the Russian leadership to use military force and to suffer high losses to achieve military advantages. Vis-à-vis us, who have no will whatsoever to use military force, sometimes you even doubt if there is political will to use military force for defense. But vis-à-vis Russia, remember 2014, the first thing everybody said on the European level was the use of military forces excluded. When the Russian special forces entered the administrative building in Simferopol on Crimea. That was the first thing everybody said in Europe. We will not use military force. That is where we are when it comes to political will. I think that is where the real threat is from Russia. And suffering high losses, I would not underestimate this. That's why I agree with General BADIA on be ready today. We are coming from a culture in our societies, at least for the last decades, where we believe military action, like the action we did in Afghanistan or somewhere else, is something where we can be successful militarily and not have any, or if any, very low losses ourselves. This is not the nature of the war we see in Ukraine. And it's, I think, a big task for our societies to understand if we defend ourselves, we might only be able to defend ourselves against a threat such as Russia if we are ready also to have losses on our side. And I think Putin knows all this. He knows our societal psychology about this. And he thinks we are not ready. That's why I think it's very tempting for him. I mean, he's attacking our cyber infrastructures every day. By the way, we are not imposing any costs on him for this. Why should he stop? There are attacks on infrastructures. There is hybrid warfare in many dimensions. But if you imagine a combined attack with missiles, drones, ballistic missiles, cruise missiles happening, what would we do? Do we have an answer prepared for that? Would we choose targets in Russia and hit them? Seriously, did we think this through? So my answer is, if we are prepared, we are, I think, and we are not prepared. Not as societies and also not politically. So where's the hope was your question, and the leadership in Europe? Unfortunately, I mean, fortunately there is leadership. Unfortunately, it is coming from smaller countries. I mean, look at Mette Frederiksen in Denmark, who will have a hard time now with Greenland and with Trump and all of that. It's a country where she says, this is a war against the European security order. We need to do everything we can to stop Vladimir Putin. Ukraine needs to win. And she's not only saying this, she decided that for example, all of the self-propelled artillery of Denmark is delivered to Ukraine because the Danish people say it's the best use for all of Danish artillery is in Ukraine right now. And if we use it there, we can make sure that we do not have to use it in Denmark later. So that's leadership. And Denmark, by the way, is the first country buying Ukrainian howitzers from a Ukrainian producer in Ukraine, investing also in the Ukrainian defense industrial base. So now imagine this kind of leadership would be exercised by one of the big four General BADIA talked about, or even better by 3 European out of the big four. The situation would immediately change. Exactly. That's why it is so important if there is German leadership, and I have the suspicion, Werner, that this was the subtext of your question, if we can expect German leadership. I believe the next German government could be more forward-leaning on Ukraine. But at the same time, looking into the polls, I have questions if there will be a strong mandate for the next German government, or if we will have again a 3-party coalition with the lowest common denominator. And that leads me to my last point. I think our domestic problems in many European countries, they are not really creating the preconditions to exercise leadership to the outside. Everybody is busy with domestic problems at the moment. In Germany, we decided to have elections in this moment in time. In Austria, somebody else has to explain to me what you are doing here. In France, you have Marine Le Pen looming around the corner, and France not able to have a budget. And in the United Kingdom, I think the disappointment with the Starmer government was one of the fastest disappointments in political history of the United Kingdom. So the weakness of the big European three, I think that is the weakness of Europe at the moment. I can only hope that after the elections in Germany, there will be a stronger German leadership. What I see, and this is really my last point, what I see is that when I'm not doing campaigning for Friedrich Merz, but what I see is that Friedrich Merz has an instinct to say, we have to work together with the Scandinavians. We have to work together with the Central Eastern Europeans. We have to keep everybody together in Europe. And I think that is something that will help the Europeans in NATO to exercise a stronger cohesion and come to a stronger position in this.
Can I make one remark?
Yeah, yes, please.
Just one quick remark coming back to how would a war look if NATO would take on Russia in comparison to what we see in Ukraine, because we get that asked quite often. And I just want to assure you one thing. Of course, everything we see, all the lessons identified, we take out of the war in Ukraine. But be assured, I mean, from a military man advising political leadership, and the politicians have to take the decision. But it's definitely not a war we would look for and we would fight for. Because if we would fight a land-heavy war against Russia, you lose. Because this is exactly what just has been said by how many losses, how resilient, if you will, they are within this respect. Nobody can mirror that. This is, from a capability aspect, why we need to invest a lot more in space and in cyber, because we need to look or seek the advantage in different domains, and through the different domains, creating dilemmas in order to win. And this is what we really plan and what we are after, just to give you a glimpse on that one. And just as a final one, look, the first 3 days on the Ukrainian war, 1,000 missiles did hit Ukraine. Just imagine 1,000 missiles hitting Germany or hitting Austria, what your population would do. Think about that, what would happen?
Yeah, this brings me also to my question to General HOFBAUER. General BADIA said, imagine 1,000 missiles hitting Austria. What is the answer? Do we need Sky Shield? There's some discussion. Why do we need it? What is about it?
Yeah. Well, the answer is quite clear. As I stated also to the press on the weekend, it is not a question whether we need it or not. It's just a clear fact that we need it. And this also comes to the special situation in which we are in. We are an easy target in the middle of Europe. We are outside of NATO and inside the EU. So if you want to make a point, Austria would also be a target that could be attacked. Why not? And of course, but I think this is something we share also with other countries. We would not be in the position also if we wait for some years to do the same as the Israelis were able to do when Iran attacked, because this is something that the Israeli armed forces have prepared for years and invested heavily in cooperation with the United States into those capabilities that were able to defend against such an attack. Sky Shield is more or less a symbol for the question of, is Austria willing to defend itself against a threat that is coming to the air? And as I mentioned before, what we need to be prepared for in the next step, is to prepare against those threats that are coming, be it a cruise missile, be it a hypersonic missile, whatever. And it will be extremely hard to say we are in the middle of Europe and nobody will attack us. I would not count on that.
Yeah, thank you. And now we have an opportunity to ask a few questions. Maybe Mrs. Sinigoy.
Thank you very much for this expertise panel. My question is addressed to General BADIA. Denmark has now this problem with Greenland and Mr. Trump, okay? NATO is stationed where in Greenland? How would NATO, in a situational dangerous plot, act against Chinese and Russian icebreakers, which are more or less going around under different flags, not Russian and Chinese flags, knowing that these ships are shadow shipments of gas and petroleum? How would NATO, in a risky situation, react against dangerous situations in the Northwest Passage or the Polar Trans-Passage? And how would you react, hypothetically, if Mr. Elon Musk is buying Greenland for Mr. Trump, and Mr. Trump can say, we still need NATO, even if we don't like NATO to be in Europe, because we have to defend against the Chinese and the Russians in this Northwest Passage. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, a question over there, please. then not the man in the yellow, but immediately behind him, Mr. Fellinger, because he started an initiative for membership to NATO, a new initiative in Austria, and so far.
Thanks, Mr. Minister.
It's your word.
My name is Günther Fellinger. I campaign for Austria joining NATO. And my question to the General, who would the Austrian Prime Minister call in case Austria is attacked by anybody? Would be possible in Germany, I think, that we will call for support. Yeah? And if this is the case, that you anyhow have to defend ourselves, why is nobody courageous enough in the German political and military establishment to confront Austrian neutrality and make this simple question, please, it's a truth, we have the moment of truth tonight. The General has made a lot of open statements, and it should be the statement here by the German defense establishment that Austria should join NATO.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, with the yellow vest.
Yeah, hello. Thanks very much for your presentation, and thanks also for your personal engagement in security matters to Nico LANGE. I know, being one of the most prominent voices in the German area for doing this. I wanted to ask you a specific question. I guess much of your speech or presentation you did, you could have held a year ago, because the threat of Trump was kind of very high probability. And as you said now, there's a likelihood that President Trump would say, oh, NATO is not so much interesting for me. And I was wondering, what has been happening in the meantime? What kind of planning has been happening in the meantime? What we do in that case? It seems like a year has passed and we are still very much clueless. And I wonder whether you, talking with politicians, have more insights in what is happening, which kind of plan Bs are being hatched if Trump would say, you do you and we do our things.
Okay, thank you. Let's take another one, and then we close the first round.
Yeah, thank you for your presentations. Question to Christian BADIA. What would you advise Vienna, Austria, since Russia is already very much present in Vienna? I refer to Egisto Ott, Marsalek, just to name two names. I refer to the incredible presence at the United Nations of Russia, the incredible scale of Russia and the infrastructure here. What would you advise? Because at the one end, you cannot do anything to it, but on the other end, of course, if you want to be resilient and if all the words are correct tonight, then there should be done something. There should be legislation and there should be awareness of what's happening under the surface, not only in the air, but also under the surface.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I think most of the questions went to you, but also the other
so if
speakers are...
if I may, I go for 1, 2, and 4 very quickly. What you see, what happens on Greenland, it just started there. But if you see right now where NATO nations come together when it comes to the Baltic Sea and what happened in the Baltic Sea right now, if you see the vigilance activities we are going, really what it is, and this is where it comes back to new technology and new capability. Because the problem you are having, especially it doesn't matter if it's a submarine fleet or it's a vessel fleet, you need to have, again, full information dominance and decision dominance, which comes through space and cyber. Only if you invest, and this is also for the autonomy of Europe, only if you invest in those domain and capabilities, you will be able, because first of all, you need to have the picture. And this is what you see right now in small, if you will, in the Baltics right now. So we are within NATO, in order to really have a full surveillance picture, we right now taking the technology, unmanned, underwater and above surface vehicles to really oversee and have an overwatch of what's going on in the Baltics in order to have early warning and engage and then direct the means you have in order to intervene and intercept. And the same thing will happen in Greenland, because the more the ice is going away, the more they can use the passages. And this is, again, understand the US. It's of vital interest for the US when it comes to early warning, when it comes to access. If you just look at the map that has been shown, of course, the US has an interest having an outpost and having stations in Greenland, and it's the same thing. Yeah, you want to buy it, and at the end you have a contract of co-using, which they have already, by the way, anyhow, and those 80,000 Greenland population makes a good deal out of it. We will see how that happens, but this is how it goes forward. So really, I'm not that concerned about it. What I'm concerned about is having the right technology, having it combined in an overwatch and being able to react to that. And I think we are on a good way forward, especially with what we see right now in the Baltic Sea in order to cope with that, number one. So on that way forward. On the question, I don't advise any nation, and I don't interfere with interior politics, but still have an opinion. Of course, this is what it is. For me, Sky Shield, European Sky Shield has first and foremost nothing to do, I say that, with NATO. It's protection of European space. And by the way, if you have Austria, Luxembourg, Switzerland or whatever, with the landmass you have, you cannot differentiate it anymore because you have an umbrella how you basically protect the airspace. And it's everybody's under the umbrella. So really, this is a discussion when you go forward in saying, well, you know, neutrality is one thing, but if I want to be protected, and this is what I see as it comes forward, I have to go in synergy, I have to go in cooperation, and this is what it is. And then from there, it's an internal domestic discussion on how you do that. And by the way, just to Günther's aspect, what he said before, just that you're all aware, the Israeli Iron Dome and the defense system on Israel, what's the effectiveness rate? It's 80%, ladies and gentlemen. You still need to do a lot more. You need to be offensive. You need to have alliances. You need to go for that. So just that you know, there is no 100% solution in going defensive. So this is why it's so important. So to really use all those, I mean, be pragmatic about it. Yeah, for me, it doesn't matter which political system it is. Number one is you protect your citizens, and you do the best out of it, and from there you go. And from that, for me, it's logic going into cooperations with others in order to do that. And by the way, I mean, we have that back home. Going to parliament on defensive aspects is a lot easier than as going in offensive aspects to parliament in order how you do that. And the other thing is, on the question number 4, you know, with this hybrid sanctions, what do you do? What will be a better way on the way forward? With hybrid and what I explained, what we see, number one, and this is where we are right now, number one is you have to come to a common picture. You have to have the situational awareness to say, this is what hybrid threat is all about. We discussed it, what it is, and then go with that. Then have the really, again, the forum, how you discussed it. And just as a side glimpse, Article 5 is not as important anymore as it was to me before. It's the Article 4. Because you might have situations where Article 5 cannot be invoked because it's not on the territory that's defined in Article 6 with NATO. But you have Article 4 where you go on consultations, and out of the consultations you come to the conclusion we need to do something. And this is again on hybrid, and then from there it really goes into sanctions. And from sanctions, it's, you know, I'm just saying that, look at all the oligarchs where the kids live, where the money is. There are so many things how you can hit them hard if you want in order to really sanction them. So those are things where, and when it comes to hybrid, where we need to go and where we need to structure as a way forward. But what I just said, this is a political decision. That's not our decision. We can just advise what possibilities are out there when it comes to how you identify those threats. The quick answers to those three. Yeah. And Nico. Nico?
On the preparation for this day, the second Trump presidency, my honest answer is I was shocked all year, for the last year at least, how unwilling political decision makers were to prepare for this. It's a mix of wishful thinking and non-strategic thinking at the same time. That's where we are. And I think we are at a huge disadvantage because by and large, the big European players did not prepare for this. And until the very last, I heard top-level politicians in Germany and other major European countries saying, oh, this will not happen, he will not win. I mean, if this is your prudent planning as political decision makers, then you will be at a disadvantage from the very start. Because in contrast to 2017, when Trump was inaugurated the first time, he is very well prepared now. He was totally unprepared in 2017. He was even surprised that he won. It's totally different now. And you see it with this first day, with all the executive orders, with everything that happens. I mean, many of the things he decides today as executive orders, it will never be fully implemented. Many of the things will never work. That's also clear. That's part of it. But the Europeans are not prepared enough. And I can give you one example where I think they are even prepared the wrong way. It's very likely that in the European Commission there are people who are proud of themselves that they have prepared counter-sanctions against and counter-tariffs against the terrorists that are coming from the United States of America. And it's also very predictable what will happen. If Trump imposes tariffs on certain goods from the European Union, by the way, he will not impose tariffs on countries this time. I think he will impose them on certain goods, so that also the German car coming from Mexico into the US will be under the tariffs this time. I think he has this all worked out. If then the counter tariffs are coming from the European Union against certain goods from the US, then Trump will say, oh, I'm thinking about withdrawing the US troops from Germany. And then what? Will we then proceed with the trade war? Or will we understand that we have a wide open security flank that we have to close with the United States? So I'm very skeptical when it comes to the preparations for this. Some are better prepared than others, that's also true. I mean, of all the leaders, I think Prime Minister Meloni is in Washington right now. Mm-hmm. She has been privately visiting Mar-a-Lago before the inauguration. I think that was smart. Why did others not go there? We have an overarching interest. We have an interest in cooperation with the United States of America, regardless of who is president. So what are we doing to pursue our interest? It's, I think, a relevant question. On Plan Bs, what are we doing? I think there is no. I mean, I can speak for what I know in the German political space. I believe there is no Plan B when it comes to security and the United States of America. The Plan B, it's like the Rhineland saying, es ist noch immer gut gegangen. Yeah? It always somehow it turned out well. I think that's very much the approach. The question to me is, if things are going into a difficult direction, how fast will we be able to turn things around? How fast will we be able to change? We have seen Ukraine was able, under pressure, to totally transform. And what is, I think, is inspiring, because we talked industrial base first, and that's the last point I want to make. I wonder, when we talk about preparedness and security, I wonder, why is Ukraine a country in war, where many citizens have run away, where there are budget problems? Why are they producing now 20 and more self-propelled howitzers per month? Tendency is growing at 1/3 of the price of our self-propelled howitzers. And why did we, after we delivered 18 main battle tanks to Ukraine, why did we order 18 main battle tanks as a replacement? So I think it's a question of mentality, it's a question about the will to make certain decisions. And I think the question for the Europeans is, when will we be ready to make the necessary decisions? Is it now that the war is going on in southern Donbass? Or is it after Putin attacked the city of Zaporizhia? Or is it when the Russians are on the eastern bank of the Dnieper River and have destroyed large parts of Ukraine in a couple of years? When will the moment come when we are doing this in a serious way? It will not go away. The problem will be there. And that is a question that I can only pose rhetorically, but what I know is it will be more difficult and more expensive the later we are coming to the conclusion that we are doing that we have to do this.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe another round. We start at this end over here. Yeah. Yes, please.
Thank you. Alexander Klimberg. I'm a former executive of the World Economic Forum and a researcher and advisor on cybersecurity affiliated with a number of think tanks in the US and in Europe. And I've also worked with all the organizations represented on the panel at one point or the other. Thank you very much for an excellent panel. And I completely agree with the core message that Europe really needs to understand that Russia is the clear and imminent threat that Europe has to deal with. But I'd like to come up with 3 points based on what you said, in particular about deterrence. If you see that as capabilities and will, and I want to mention something about cyber, because that's my thing. First of all, on capabilities, I'm a little bit concerned that the military approach always is secure capabilities at all costs. And in this case, it means keep American capabilities here, maybe at the cost even of developing our own capabilities. Now, General BADIA was clear that Europe needs to do so. But how are we going to be doing so if we have a situation of antagonism between the societies in Europe and the United States based on a Trump presidency doing what we think it's going to be doing? So first point is we need to take into account this
please, if you ask your question.
I'll keep it simple. How is Europe going to get the political will from the United States to support it if it can't stand up to Trump? So if we can't do that, if we can't stand up to Trump, why will Trump expect us to stand up against Russia? That's the first point. So taking everything is fine. The second thing is on cyber. I've heard cyber mentioned 6 times. I've worked with all of these organizations. And
please understand that also other people want to ask a question. Thank you very much for your attention. Maybe afterwards, after the end, we can talk about it. Okay? Yeah, there was a question over there. Yeah.
Hi, I'm a student here at the DA. I was wondering specifically, Mr. Lang, you've spoken extensively about the lack of political will. Where do you locate that specifically? In a high-level political leaders, in opposition to war in general from certain political parties, or a lack of willingness on the part of common citizens in the European Union countries to bear the burdens of war, or a more militarized sort of stance going forward? Do you see the possibility of the introduction or the expansion of conscription as a possibility should these threats increase? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, over here.
Mark Pfeiffer, just a brief question. One side regarding hybrid threats in open seas, destroying infrastructure, cables. How would we respond to that in a legal matter while respecting international law, which I think is a big issue there, because you just can't enter a vessel at international waters just like that. Second question, and in that case, probably only to the Germans to be fair, how do you feel about a pro-Russian party being part of a government in Austria or Germany later on?
Okay, immediately behind. Okay, Kettler.
Hi, thank you very much. I will be very quick. Lawrence Kettle, I'm with the AIES, and I'm an EU security and defense specialist. The one thing that all 3 of you gentlemen tapped on was this. When the war ends in Ukraine, regardless of whatever happens, it's not over. Russia is still a threat for possibly the next 20 to 40 years. So we also talked about, or rather you also talked about why it's important to, It is about explaining to the general public as well, because they also influence the decision-making of politicians as to why defense expenditure needs to be increased and why we need to focus more on deterrence. So I want to hear from the Austrian perspective, a NATO perspective, a German perspective, what can be done to help the public to understand the need to focus more on funding for deterrence actually makes war less likely? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, here in the center.
My question relates a bit to what Nico LANGE was saying about tariffs and the economy and all that. As I understand it, Trump's plans for tariffs are likely to put up inflation in the United States, which will be extremely unpopular. Do you think that the European Commission has actually made a mistake in preparing for counter tariffs? Because it's possible that a trade war will be damaging for both the Europeans and the United States and will diminish the prospects for solidarity and cooperation between the United States and Europe. What would you suggest that the European Commission should actually be doing?
Okay, thank you. And at the very center over there, last question. Yeah, yes, please.
Thank you. Some cynics say that the United States needs a war every 10 years to train their next generation of military leaders. Would it be necessary to have the situation escalate in Europe to wake up the sleeping society and the ignorant politicians?
Okay. So now I ask the panel, answering the questions and maybe also give us a final statement. Yeah.
I can pick a few and then
yes, let's go.
Leave the rest to the others. I will just. If you ask me where the problem is, I think it's very much so with the political decision makers in Germany. And Germany, not because I am German, but because Germany is as big as it is and lies where it is and is as economically strong as it is, plays a very important role. And if Germany would decide to be more forward-leaning, I think it would change the situation very significantly. And it connects to another question that was raised about public opinion and how to make the public ready. And it's an argument I heard here in Austria when I was here also on your invitation roughly a year ago or a year and a half, where I confronted some people here, but also Austrian politicians with the questions, why are you not using the momentum to discuss neutrality, and why are you not seeing the signs on the wall like the Finns and the Swedes are seeing them? Why do you consider this all differently? And some top-level Austrian politicians at the time, who are still at the top level today, told me, well, it's about the public opinion and people are not ready yet. And if you think about this, it's very similar to the conscription discussion we have in Germany. So some politician says, look, a discussion cannot be avoided. I mean, what kind of leadership is this? If you are saying, oh, a discussion cannot be avoided. And then you say, oh, the people are not ready yet. So there is this, I think, wrong understanding of policy making that you have to discuss and discuss and discuss, and then magically consensus appears and people want it, and then you do it. And I think the opposite is true. Representative democracy has a leadership component. And I mean, from experience in Germany, I can only say people were against delivering tanks and heavy weapons, what they called heavy weapons. I never understand what that was, but tanks, infantry fighting vehicles to Ukraine. Then the decision was made to deliver them, and guess what? Public opinion was for it after the decision was made. So it's about leading into the right direction and not waiting for the public opinion, magically developing into the direction that is the right direction for our security. All major security policy discussions in the history of the Federal Republic of Germany were decided by leadership, sometimes against the public opinion, and they turned out to be the right thing for German security. So that kind of representative democracy leadership is needed again. And maybe I pick one question on that was not even asked to me, but I still want to talk about it, on hybrid warfare. I understand the legal restrictions of many things. I understand the legal restrictions also we have in Germany. And at the same time, I know if we have drones flying around over German training grounds or over ports, I want those drones to be shot down and not have a discussion, oh, there is legal restraints and who is responsible, is it this institution or that institution? Because deterrence is about communication. It's about if you do harm to me, the price for you will be very high. And that is something I think we have to relearn as Europeans.
Okay.
And by the way, it's also true for cyber. If all the cyber attacks, if the billions of damage to small and medium-sized companies in Germany and Austria is happening every year and we are not imposing a cost to the other side, I mean, who will take us seriously? I think that's a key question, how to relearn deterrence as Europeans. And it starts by shooting down the drone, and it starts, what I think, it was mentioned before, like the Finnish colleagues did, by going on that vessel and stopping it. And they did not officially invoke Article 4, but there was a NATO summit about Baltic Sea security, and the situation is improving now. So sending a message of strength and deterrence, that is very important. I have, with the Munich Security Conference, I have a program that is called Zeitenwende on Tour, where we do town hall meetings all over Germany. And my experience in all discussions, we had many, many discussions, is the opposite of what the leading politicians are telling me. They are telling me, you cannot discuss security policy with the citizens. You cannot make the argument. People will not be convinced. My impression is people want to be treated as adults. They want to hear what the risks are, what the costs are, what the plan is. It's possible to turn the public opinion on those questions. Even on Austrian neutrality, I believe it would be possible.
Yeah. General HOFBAUER.
Some points of the question you have asked are already answered. I see that I would like to stress 2 points. The one thing is, it's not only about the population, it's very important to explain it to the politicians. And that is something where the military needs to take the advisory role, and on the other side, the politicians need to listen. That is, for the Austrian special situation, I would like to highlight the fact that the worst thing for us is a prolonged gray zone war. And this gray zone war will expand soon into the Balkans. And then it gets very quickly very relevant for Austria, because then it's not about Kaliningrad, it's not about somewhere in the Baltics, far away, nobody knows that in Austria, nobody cares. But when it comes to the Balkans, we really got a problem. And this is an easy target. It's much easier to do the gray zones warfare in the Balkans area with all those problems that we have in the various zones like Kosovo, like Bosnia, with the Republika Srpska, all the things that are going on in Transnistria, Moldova. Easy target. No stable democracies, no strong NATO. And this is something that really brings it very close to Vienna and to Austrian politicians.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Also to make it clear, you know, how close we are to crisis zones. They are in our immediate neighborhood. General,
yeah, very quickly to all the points that we make. I try to be brief on a few of those points. The cynical question you asked, I ask myself quite often. Are we getting to that point? And I'm afraid of. I tell you, we're moving that direction with crisis or war, and then you will change. And this also leads, so I think there's a chance out there that we will not act as we could and not be as proactive as we should. And then we could get into a situation where it's like everybody looks then and say, how could that happen? So, this is also something, again, this is explaining from a political point of view with experts, really explaining what the situation is and what the we all hope it's not happening, but there is a possibility out there. And this is the other question was just asked on cost benefit. Do we explain to population how much it costs? And I tell you, we have enough examples because the world never was peaceful, and in average you can say, if you talk to historians, if you have to rebuild, about 40% of your GDP is gone just for rebuilding. So the question is, do I invest 3%, or does it come to a point where I have to, over a long time and period, 40% in what's happening? Just look at the Ukraine, look towards Israel, things that are happening there, what it costs in order to rebuild, and really it's again where we need to be honest to each other. When it comes to security, it's an investment. It's not a burden. And this is what we feel, especially back home. I always have this, you always have to make excuses for it. Why are you asking for more money? It's such a burden that you do that. No, it's an investment. And this is where we really need to come forward. This is what society needs to understand, where we need to go. So from that, I'm fully with you, because otherwise you end up in the cynical question, maybe, and you don't want to be there. The other question on hybrid, again, what I also see is, law just doesn't happen. It's by experience. They are saying, and now we are in a new phase. And this is where it comes back to, and you will see in the Baltic what happens, because if you practice this, if you go on board of those ships, if you prove what they did, law will change overall. And again, if you do it in that way, it's very, again, transparent what happens. So I think you will not have a problem when you execute like that.
But you're breaking the law by entering.
Well,
if you're a coastal state under UN Convention, Finland, I think, did everything right.
Yeah. That still take it to, again, I'm the guy who always tells you, let's go to court, we'll see. Okay, make your case, but be brave. Okay, so on that one, on hybrid, and really on these capability questions, again, cyber and space, why do I mention it? If you want to gain the advantage, you only gain it over those two domains with all the technology is back there, and Europe would be capable of doing that. We just need to start really understanding what it means, and we need to have, but we can discuss that afterwards in order to really go in that direction. So for me, cyber and space are those domains, they need to have the utmost importance and focus.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. I think it was quite an experience. Thank you so much. Big hand for our speakers. I do not want to sum it up, but I just want to maybe speak out a few things that were touched. The start was, what can we expect from this special American new president? And maybe the discussion about Donald Trump are an obstacle to discuss our own challenges here in Europe. We are discussing the weaknesses that we get from the other side of the Atlantic, but we are not discussing about the weak points in our own system. And there was the question, of deterrence. That deterrence is much, much cheaper than having to repair after a crisis. If you just look at the situation in Ukraine, millions of people who left the country, billions of things that were destroyed we have to recover, structures that were destroyed, everything. I do not even talk about their lives, how many people have lost their life. And insofar, we certainly will have to overthink our strategies, not only be ready to fight when a war is breaking out, but preparing in order it will not break out. This certainly is of utmost importance. And at the end, I just want to say, it's not so much a specific armament that we do have or not, but probably much more important is the will to do it, the will to prepare, the will to fight, the will to engage, and to overcome also some, as it was said at the beginning, some Gemütlichkeit in our life, because if we do that, that will help us in order to gain Gemütlichkeit due to the fact that we are in a secure and in a safe situation. So far, thank you so much. It really was a great pleasure. Thank you, Nico, for coming again. It's always a pleasure to have you here, and we wish you all the best. I also can say, you know, that of course, from the neighborhood, I have to say, Germany's role certainly will have very high importance for European security. And Germany still has to go a long way to become a normal actor in this size. A long way in order to take leadership that it has to overtake. This is for all the generals. Yeah, and also we in Austria, we will have to overtake a few things and try to do it. Not just hesitate. And insofar, thank you so much, General BADIA. Thank you, Nico. Thank you, General HOFBAUER. It really was a pleasure. Once again, a big, big hand to you.